Vishnupadaya Vishnupadaya invocation prayers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurunnitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadam Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namte Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Charine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastrati Deshatarine. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to serve. As we discussed an overview of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and this wonderful book by Srila Prabhupada, representing an overview of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya is based on the biography of Lord Chaitanya, which is the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And I pray for all your blessings with us this class, so we can have a better idea of the teachings of the Lord, so we can serve Him better and develop our love for Him. So today we're going on to discuss the fourth chapter of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, called The Wise Man, and its continuation of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions to Sanatana Goswami that we started last week. So we'll begin with a verse in glorification of Lord and His associates, verse 18 of the first chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Translation. Glory to Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So the way the discussion between Lord Chaitanya and Sanatana Goswami is proceeding is that Sanatana Goswami is asking the Lord pertinent questions on behalf of spirit souls, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is expertly answering them. So previously, Sanatana Goswami had begun his questions by asking the Lord who we actually are and what is our constitutional position and why are we suffering in this material world. And Chaitanya had begun by explaining that we are the eternal spirit souls, the duties to serve Krishna and fallen under the control of the material nature. This is the reason why we're suffering from the miseries from contact with the material nature. So the Lord is continuing. Since no one can trace the history of the living entity's entanglement in material energy, Lord Chaitanya said that it is beginningless. By beginningless, he meant that conditioned life exists prior to the creation. It simply becomes manifest during and after the creation. Due to forgetfulness of his real nature, the living entity, although spirit, suffers all kinds of miseries in material existence. It should be understood that there are also living entities who are not entangled with this material energy, but are situated in the spiritual world. They are called liberated souls and are always engaged in Krishna consciousness, devotional service. So here, Lord Chaitanya is actually in the terms of eternally conditioned and eternally liberated. So those who are internally conditioned, the Sanskrit term is Nityapada, and these souls have fallen into the material world so long ago that Lord Chaitanya actually describes their presence in the material world as these souls are always spiritual, but as soon as they come under the material nature, they forget their relationship and their transmigration starts. And it's very difficult for them to actually get to the point of remembering that eternal relationship again. So the reference to creation is that even though this material creation is very old, but we have been here so long that we even precede this particular creation, which means that we are here from many creations back. We know that the material creations are actually continuously coming into existence and then being annihilated again. Then they're taken into the body of Mahavishnu. And so all the souls that are still cycling in birth and death are also um, taken in. And when the night of Brahma is over and it's time for creation to begin again, then all these souls are released into the material creation. And so this has been going on for time immemorial. So the importance of this is for us to see that we've come to this situation, this human form of life and we come into contact with the philosophy of spiritual life in order to free us, this is something that is so precious because it hasn't happened since practically beginning of time, the time that we've been here. And the analogy that's often given is that of a turtle that's swimming in the ocean. What are the chances that the turtle will come into contact with a piece of wood that has a hole in it that's just the right size for the head of the turtle? And what are the chances, with all the waves bobbing up and down, that that turtle will be able to get itself, its head right into that hole? This is our situation. There's so many factors that come into play. And when we come into contact with Krishna consciousness, it's our duty to perfect our human form of life so we can get out of the entanglements of material existence once and for all and not waste this precious chance that may not come again for another eternity. So then the Lord explains, of course, about the Nitya devotees, and these are eternally liberated souls. They're always in the spiritual world of Krishna, and they never fall into the material world, but they sometimes come into the material world. So the difference in that is that to fall into the material world, like the eternally conditioned souls do, like we, means we come under the material energy spell when we come into this world. But when the eternally liberated souls, like Srila Prabhupada, come into the material world, they don't come under the material energy spell, even though they come into this world. They have a mission on behalf of the Supreme Lord in order to assist the souls in attaining liberation out of the suffering of the material world. That's why they come here. They never fall under material energies. So there's a big difference between the term liberated when it's applying to these souls as compared to the term liberation that we were discussing previously. Because liberation itself, becoming free of material attachments, um, this is something that even the impersonalist philosophers can achieve. This is why we said that they can come to the platform of liberation, but they can't stay there. The difference then with the eternally liberated souls, pure devotees of Krishna, is that they are more than just liberated. They're on a transcendental platform. This means that besides liberation, they've attained that state of pure spiritual consciousness of Krishna, pure love for him. And being on that transcendental level, they can never fall into material nature versus the liberation that a person's philosopher can achieve, which causes them to fall eventually because they don't reach the level of transcendence. And this level of transcendence is what we are trying to achieve through devotion service. So, Srila Prabhupada explaining Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's speech continues. The activities of those who are conditioned by material nature are taken into account, and in their next life, according to these activities, they are offered different grades of material bodies. Thus, in the material world, the conditioned spirit soul is subjected to various rewards and punishments. When he is rewarded for his righteous activities, he is elevated to the higher planets, where he becomes one of the many demigods. And when he is punished for his abominable activities, he is thrown into various hellish planets, where he suffers the miseries of material existence more acutely. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives a very nice example of this punishment. Formerly, a king used to punish a criminal by having him dunked in a river, raised up again for breath, and then again dunked in the water. Material nature punishes and rewards the individual living entity in just the same way. When he is punished, he is dunked in the water of material miseries. When he is rewarded, he is taken out with some time. Elevation to the higher planets or to a higher status of life on this planet is never permanent. One must again come down to be submerged in the water. All this is constantly going on in this material existence. So this is a very nice way that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is explaining material happiness. It seems important to people to achieve, but it's basically just a very short relief from torture. In fact, you could actually consider it to be part of torture because the whole process of torture hasn't really ended. The period when one is raised above the water, catch one's breath, is just um, some temporary respite from the torture that is actually going to continue a short while. And this is what material happiness is. So whether somebody is trying to achieve that by reaching the heavenly planets, which is about the highest material pleasure that one can get in the material world, or whether one is trying to achieve that even in this world, which can afford a lot of opulence and comfort and so on, that is all still compared to this temporary relief of torture. In the same way, when somebody's taking that gasp of breath above the water, one could not say that they are happy, peaceful, or satisfied. So, in the same way, anybody who is temporarily enjoying some kind of happiness is not going to achieve real happiness, real satisfaction, real peace. This case true of any place that is trying to, that one would try to achieve happiness high up in the heavenly planets or down to the hellish planets. Then Lord Chaitanya quotes the verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 11th canto, which speaks about how Maya is actually defined as forgetfulness of one's relationship with Krishna. Srila Prabhupada says that Maya actually means that which is not. Thus, it is false to think that the living entity has no connection to the Supreme Lord. He may not believe in the existence of God, or he may think that he has no relationship with God. But these ideas are all illusions or Maya. Due to absorption in this false conception of life, a man is always fearful and full of anxieties. In other words, Maya is the godless conception of life. So, what we understand from this is that all of us, of course, have a relationship with Krishna, whether we try to deny it or not. But when we forget that relationship, that's immediately when we come under the control of Maya. So it's sort of like a binary situation. It's either one or zero. It's either yes or no. There's no maybe or in between. We're either under the control of Krishna, engaging in our eternal relationship of service, or we're under the control of Maya. As soon as we leave the shelter of Krishna, the soul immediately realizes its vulnerability and it senses the acute anxiety that is characteristic of the material world. That every living who is in the conditioned level, even if they're apparently liberated by the Mayavadis, everyone is under the spell of anxiety. Only someone who is completely transcendental is free of it. This is the reason why spiritual world, the realm of transcendence, is called Vaikuntha, which is freedom from anxiety. And this anxiety, of course, is always present in every way in the material world. So what that means is that in the spiritual world, everybody is acting according to this eternal relationship of service with Krishna. And although when you consider that by material conception, being in a position of service means subordination, generally a state of unhappiness. Those who are in the spiritual world engaged in the service of Krishna are in the state of ultimate happiness. And they're in the ultimate state of safety, protection. They have absolutely no anxieties at all. Whereas we who have come to this material world to enjoy something which is prized, independence, we're suffering from anxiety, we're suffering from fears. So, how important or how satisfying is this sense of so called freedom that we have in the material world? Srila Prabhupada continues. One who is actually learned in the Vedic literature surrenders unto the Supreme Lord with great devotion and accepts him as the supreme goal. When a living entity forgets the constitutional nature of his relationship with God, he is at once overwhelmed by the external energy. This is the cause of his false ego, his false identification of the body with the self. Indeed, his whole conception of the material universe arises from this false identification of the body, for he becomes attached to the body and its byproducts. To escape this entanglement, he has only to perform his duty, namely to surrender unto the Supreme Lord with intelligence, with devotion, and with sincere Krishna consciousness. So, the ego in its essence is our sense of identity. And if we have the sense of identity, the real sense of identity of being servants of Krishna, servants of those who serve Krishna, then that sense of ego is actually not a bad thing. This is the sense of ego that we're supposed to cultivate, because to be without ego, to be without identity, is actually impossible. So the problem is that if we're not in the spiritual consciousness of understanding that we are servants of Krishna always and acting according to that, then we immediately get conditioned by the material consciousness, which is false ego of thinking that we are masters. This is, of course, false ego because we're never in any state of being the master. We're actually being controlled by material nature all the time. Because her illusion, a net of illusion, is so dense, nobody has an idea that they're being controlled. Everyone is under this false impression of being a master. And therefore, this is characterized by ignorance. Ignorance is the state that underlies everything in this material world. It's the ignorance of our eternal relationship with Krishna. So when we're conditioned by this ignorance, because of the illusion that Maya casts over us, then we're the masters. The only way that we could ever be free of this is by reviving that eternal relationship of service with Krishna and acting according to it through the process of Bhakti Yoga. A conditioned soul falsely thinks himself happy in the material world, but if he is favored by an unalloyed devotee, if he hears the unalloyed devotee's instructions, he gives up his desire for material enjoyment and becomes enlightened to Krishna consciousness. As soon as one enters into Krishna consciousness, his desire for material enjoyment is at once vanquished, and he gradually becomes free from material entanglement. There is no question of darkness where there is light, and Krishna consciousness is the light that dispels the darkness of material sense enjoyment. So we see here, as comes up so many times, that the mercy of devotees is so important to achieving the mercy of Krishna, getting out of our dense darkness of this ignorance, this illusion, this false ego. So we've heard so many times that Krishna shows special favor to those who surrender to him, and this is actually through the mercy of the devotees, because Krishna himself is always being held accountable by the demons. As we recall from the seventh canto, Hiranyakashipu was accusing the Lord of being impartial towards the demigods, being impartial towards his devotees, forgetting that the Lord is actually fairly neutral. He gives the demons many opportunities. It's the reason why he only intervened in the case of Hiranyakashipu. After Hiranyakashipu had many opportunities to repent, he had actually perpetuated quite a fair amount of atrocities before the Lord stepped in and killed him. And it was the same with Ravan. Ravan was given many opportunities to return Sita, many opportunities before he kidnapped Sita when he was perpetuating other terrible acts to repent. But repeatedly he ignored all counsel. So the Lord is neutral. But the importance of how he shows his impartiality to those who surrender to him is through the devotees. That's because the pure devotee is a representative of Krishna. He is Krishna's extension of mercy into our lives. So in that way, he is Krishna's. He's like Krishna, but he's not Krishna, of course, in that he's not supreme. So this oneness and difference is important for us to understand this concept of how the Lord's mercy is especially extended to us. So when the pure devotee is merciful to us, the floodgates of Krishna's love and mercy open on us, regardless of his state of neutrality. So all considerations of being impartial to everyone just go out the window. Through the pure devotee, we get Krishna's mercy when we surrender. And Krishna's stance of neutrality is immediately curtailed by the mercy of the pure devotee. The Srila Prabhupada continues. A Krishna conscious person is never under the false conception that he is one with God. Knowing that he would not be happy working for himself, he engages all his energies in the service of the Supreme Lord and thereby gains release from the clutches of the illusory material energy. In this connection, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quoted a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. This is chapter 7, text 14, where Krishna states, Devi hi esha gunamahi mama maya durattiya mam evaye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. My material energy, composed of three modes of material nature, is very strong. It is very difficult to escape the clutches of the material energy, but one who surrenders unto me is easily freed from the clutches of Maya. So this message of surrender to Krishna is the essence of all scriptures, and it is the only way that we can get free from this material energy. The material energy, its spell of illusion, they're very strong. That is because this material energy belongs to Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada had often cautioned us that the problem is that we don't fear material energy enough. We don't think that she's powerful enough to keep us under her spell, but she's always there looking for an opportunity to test us in our spiritual resolve to keep getting free from her illusion. So we have to always be mindful of this. Obviously, by taking the right shelter of spiritual master and scripture, and if we surrender properly under their guidance in that way, then the material energy immediately yields, as Krishna promises, through such surrender, and we'll become free of this horrible spell of illusion, the ignorance that keeps us gasping for breath all the time in the material world, proverbial sense. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went on to teach that each and every moment the conditioned soul is engaged in some fruitive activity, he forgets his real identity. Sometimes, when he is tired of material activities, he wants liberation and hankers to become one with the Supreme. But at other times, he thinks that by working hard to gratify his senses, he will be happy. In both cases, he is covered by the material energy. So, this is the state of what is described as Bhoga and Tyaga, this enjoyment and renunciation. Generally, in this day and age, because of the intensity of Kali Yuga, most people are really, really so under the spell of material enjoyment that hardly any get fed up of it and want to renounce it. But this phenomenon does happen from time to time. There are people who will come to the understanding that material enjoyment is very superfluous, and they'll try to take to spiritual life in some way, and usually it's by yoga or delving into philosophy. And the most recent example of that in quite a significant scale was the hippie movement, the 1960s and 70s. Essentially, what the hippies were doing was renouncing their homes, their education, material wealth, their jobs, their families, because they were in search of spiritual life. And they were, of course, as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is explaining, still conditioned by the material energy. So when they were exposed to philosophy and yoga, they were actually doing it with the aim of becoming one with God. We know from Srila Prabhupada's biographies that he had encountered this argument so many times from people who were claiming to be God or claiming to be able to be one with God. So even in the modern times, although we have comparatively less spiritualists, but there's still people who are trying, and they're still conditioned by this consciousness. People talk about achieving unification of the consciousness with God, or achieving unification of God, or we're all being one, or all being godly on some level. And this is unfortunately because this mentality of wanting to become one with God is so prevalent. It's almost universally accepted by people as the goal of spiritual life, and yet it's the diametric opposite. The goal of spiritual life is to become the eternal servant of God, or to revive our eternal relationship of servitude to God. For the enlightenment of such bewildered conditioned souls who are working under a false identification, the Supreme Lord has presented us with voluminous Vedic literature, including the Vedas, the Puranas, the Vedanta Sutra. These are all intended to guide the human being back to Godhead. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu further explained that when a conditioned soul is accepted by a spiritual master out of his mercy and is guided by the Supersoul, the soul can take advantage of the various Vedic scriptures, become enlightened, and make progress in spiritual realization. It is because Lord Krishna is always merciful to his devotees that he has presented all this Vedic literature by which one can understand his relationship with him and can act on the basis of that relationship. In this way, one is gifted with the ultimate goal of life. So we have all this extraordinary Vedic knowledge, and integral to us understanding this knowledge in the right context is the mercy and the guidance of the spiritual master. We touched on this last week, and of course, many speakers explained to us that the Vedas can be easily misinterpreted if one doesn't have the guidance of a pure devotee of the Lord. Pure devotee has the right understanding passed down from Krishna himself through the disciple succession. And in this way, we can study the Vedas by hearing properly from the pure devotee, from the spiritual master, and understand it with their guidance. In this way, we'll get the right understanding of what our relationship with Krishna is. And through this process, we can make our application to Krishna to get his mercy. and if He is favorably disposed towards us out of causeless mercy, He will release us from the spell of His Maya. We can get free of not only these horrible material miseries, but this terrible state of anxiety, and achieve the ultimate shelter at His lotus feet. Actually, every living entity is destined to understand his relationship with the Supreme Lord and ultimately to reach Him. The execution of duties to attain this perfection is known as devotional service. And in maturity, such devotional service becomes love of God, the true goal of life for every living being. The living entity should not desire success in religious rituals, economic development, or sense enjoyment, or even liberation. One should desire only to achieve the stage of transcendental loving service to the Lord, pure Krishna consciousness. The all-attractive features of Lord Krishna help one attain the stage of pure devotional service, and one who engages in the preliminary practices of Krishna consciousness can ultimately realize the relationship between himself and Krishna. So this is a very interesting point, that every living entity is actually destined to revive this nature, this real nature of servitude to Krishna. The problem is that because it takes so long, this is the reason why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says it seems beginningless. We approach every religious process like we approach everything else in the real world for some kind of benefit on our part. And as soon as we do that, we lose the essence of being servants of Krishna. It's still that tendency of being master. So Srila Prabhupada says we're either trying to achieve um, economic development, we're trying to achieve liberation for our own purposes, not for service of Krishna. We're trying to get mystic powers. All these side attractions of the religious processes that are presented in Vedas distract us from what is the real goal: loving service to Krishna, not just service for some goal. And it's actually, if we think about it, very sad. As Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna has so many attractive features that he's the only one, in fact, in all of creation that possesses this attractiveness of all these 64 attractive qualities. Um, he's so loving, so selflessly loving towards us, and all we can do is want things from him. So we know in the material world, if we have a situation where we encounter people who just want things from us when we're trying to help them selflessly, it's very hurtful. And so we can apply this to the Supreme Lord because He is a person. We have to, as much as possible, cultivate, even in the preliminary stages, as Srila Prabhupada says, um, the sense of not wanting anything from Krishna, trying to show Him our love, making Him feel wanted the way we would want to in a relationship. And this is the beginnings of real devotional service. And this, of course, again, is the only way that we can get out of Maya's spell. In this connection, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu related the story from Srila Madhvacharya's commentary on the fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. This story involves the instructions of an astrologer, Sarvagya, to a poor man who came to him to have his future told. When the astrologer saw the man's horoscope, he was astonished that the man was so poor, and he said to him, "Why are you so unhappy? From your horoscope I can see that you have a hidden treasure left to you by your father. However, the horoscope indicates that your father could not disclose this to you because he died in a foreign place. But now you can search out this treasure and be happy." This story is cited because the living entity is suffering due to his ignorance of the hidden treasure of his Supreme Father, Krishna. That treasure is love of Godhead, and in every Vedic scripture, the conditioned soul is advised to find it. Therefore, the Vedic literature is given to him to help him search out his father and his paternal property. So this is an allegory, it's an instructive story for us to be enlightened about our relationship to Krishna, reviving it. We are in desperate want of love of God, and that's the real treasure. We're all spiritually poor, and this is the reason why we're all intensely suffering, as this poor man who approached the astrologer. And we can think of the astrologer as the pure devotee, as the spiritual master, as the one who gives us the instruction on how we can achieve this treasure of love of God, which is actually buried within us, since all of us are inherently servants of Krishna, we all have this love. We often talk about cultivating it, but because we know it's always there. It's not something that we have to put there. Love of God is within us, but it's been covered by this dense illusion of Maya. So the process of uncovering this treasure, digging for this treasure, for where it is buried, is what our devotional practices will do for us. And then we can find this ultimate wealth. The astrologer further advised the poor man, don't dig on the southern side of your house to find the treasure, for if you do so, you will be attacked by a poisonous wasp and will be baffled in your efforts to find the treasure. Search on the eastern side where there is actual light, which is devotional service or Krishna consciousness. On the southern side, there are Vedic rituals. On the western side, there is mental speculation. And on the northern side, there is meditation or yoga. The astrologer's advice should be carefully noted by everyone. If one searches for the ultimate goal by Vedic ritualistic process, he will surely be baffled. Such a process involves the performance of rituals under the guidance of a priest who takes money in exchange for service. A man may think he will be happy by performing such rituals, but this is not true. Even if he does gain some result from them, it is only temporary. His material stresses will continue, so he will never be truly happy by following the ritualistic process. Instead, his material pangs will increase more and more. So, this process of Vedic um, rituals in order to gain material benefit is the karma kanda section of the Vedas. But we see that there are many analogous processes amongst different cultures of the world. In North America, amongst the Red Indians, in pagan culture in Europe, in the African culture, in Africa, everybody has a system of rituals to appease a higher power, whether these are gods of some form, nature spirits, ancestors. Um, these are very similar actually to the Vedic rituals. They even involve fire, fire rituals, fire sacrifices, or fire in some way, which probably points to that common root of Vedic culture having been the original culture of the earth. Either way, um, the problem with all the rituals that are trying to appease any material deity, whether they're demigods, ancestors, or spirits, is that all the benefits that can be bestowed by such personalities is temporary. It's not at all spiritual, and it's not going to help us get free of our material needs. The importance of the allegory in telling us that to dig on that side, to look for love of Godhead in Vedic rituals is actually useless. There's no treasure there. In fact, the stinging of the wasp is the pain that we get from chasing material benefits, because material benefits are always painful, whether we realize them or not. When we have them, we think that they're causing us pleasure, but they're binding us further, and we lose them, that's when we feel the acute pain most. The same may be said for digging on the northern side or searching for the treasure of love of Godhead by means of the meditation or yoga process. The perfection of this process is to think oneself one with the Supreme Lord. But this merging into the Supreme is like being swallowed by a large serpent. Sometimes a small serpent is swallowed by a large serpent, and merging into the spiritual existence of the Supreme is analogous. While the small serpent is searching after perfection, he is swallowed. This is spiritual suicide. On the western side, there is also an impediment in the form of a yaksha, an evil spirit who protects the treasure. This yaksha is jnana yoga, the speculative process of self-realization. The idea is that the hidden treasure can never be found by one who asks the favor of a yaksha to attain. The result is that one will simply be killed. So while the yogi's practicing meditation is like a small serpent being swallowed by a large serpent, practicing the speculative process to attain the treasure of love of Godhead is also suicidal. So these are very nice explanations as to why we shouldn't try to achieve love of God through other paths. Like we've been taught, um, eventually after a lot of searching, one may be fortunate to achieve um, this love of Godhead through the mercy of devotee. But generally, if one continues through the mystic yoga process or a speculative jnana yoga process, one is distracted by these material desires. Particularly with mystic yoga, they are the mystic powers that one gains. And then, of course, mystic yoga and speculative jnana yoga both lead people to thinking themselves one with God, or wanting to become one with God as the ultimate goal. We were explaining earlier, it's common misconception, and very attractive to people to think that. So these are the huge pitfalls. This Legere is explaining that the point of mystic yoga, of course, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, is to realize Him as the Supreme Lord and then to take to devotional service afterwards. But people become enamored with this idea, not just of getting these material powers, but then becoming one with God and having supreme power. Srila Prabhupada compares this to a small serpent being swallowed by a big serpent. This is because the small spirit soul wants to merge into the great soul. But all that happens is that the spirit soul is allowed to reside within the effulgence of the great soul. It can never become one with the great soul. And being in that position, it's unable to revive its identity of being a servant of Krishna and engaging in devotional service to get free of the material world. So it's actually losing its spiritual potential, and this is why it's called spiritual suicide. It's practically killing its identity and its chances of freedom that come with that identity. Its chances to engage in devotional service and get free of the material world. And this is the tragic state of one who is trying to uh, attain oneness with the Supreme Lord. That's the trouble with the northern side. So the soul that digs on the western side, Srila Prabhupada said, will encounter this yaksha of personal Brahman realization. So the yakshas are a race of supernatural beings, and their function is to guard treasure. So if one is trying to achieve knowledge by studying the Vedas, one could come to the point of love of God. But if one then gets distracted by jnana yoga, this is like approaching the yaksha. If we try to achieve love of God through jnana yoga, it will never happen by trying to merge into the impersonal Brahman. This is like approaching the action. This is also a kind of spiritual suicide, because one will have their chances of attaining love of Godhead destroyed or killed by this desire to become one with the Supreme Lord. So the importance, again, is for us to avoid all these kinds of these material desires that distract us from digging in the right place, finding the treasure of love of God in the right place. The only possibility then is to search for the hidden treasure on the eastern side, which represents the process of devotional service, full Krishna consciousness. Indeed, the process of devotional service is itself the perpetual hidden treasure, and one who attains to it becomes perpetually rich. One who is poor in devotional service to Krishna is always in need of material gain. Sometimes he suffers the bites of poisonous creatures and is baffled, and sometimes he follows the philosophy of monism and thereby loses his identity and is swallowed by a large serpent. It is only by abandoning all this and becoming fixed in Krishna consciousness, devotional service to the Lord, that one can actually achieve perfection of life. So this wonder of devotional service, um, which which is described as shining the light on that treasure, is that devotional service is actually part of the treasure. It's the means and it's the goal. One who attains it, Srila Prabhupada says, is perpetually rich. And one who is poor in devotional service, who doesn't have devotional service, is always chasing after all these illusions, perpetually suffering. So by getting the mercy of the spiritual master, by getting the mercy of the pure devotee, by getting the mercy of the pure devotee, we can achieve devotional service and execute it in the right way, and we can attain this treasure of love of God. So thank you all so much for your kind attention. Next week we're going to continue the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sanatana Goswami, chapter 5 of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Please rejoin us then. Are there any questions? Any comments?
The class.
Thank you, service.
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us how we can serve devotees and get their mercy? Some examples.
Okay, so this is we can probably take the cue from Rupa Goswami guiding us as to in a few ways. We can take it from different angles. So if we look at the classes of devotees, so we have the Kanishta devotees, the first, the third class devotees, the Madhyam devotees, Madhyamadikaris, that's the middle, the second class devotees, and the first class devotees are the Uttamadikaris, the pure devotees. So with the Kanishta Adhikaris, those who are, as Rupa Goswami says, those who are chanting, we offer respects to them in our mind. We associate with the Madhyamadikaris and we serve and take, we offer obeisances and we to the Madhyamadikaris and serve very with love and take the association of the Uttamadikaris because these pure devotees are the ones who can deliver us to Krishna. Then if we take it from the other perspective that Rupa Goswami gives us, which is where we see those that come in the four categories, those who are ignorant, we show mercy to them. Those who are envious, we avoid them. Those who are on the same level of us, we are friendly to them. And those who are pure devotees, we serve them. So the ways we can associate then are also given by the focus on the six relations between devotees. So we reveal our mind with confidence. We get the advice, especially pure devotees. And we give advice to devotees who need assistance from us, those on the same level as us, those who are junior to us. Then we can give gifts and accept gifts. Accepting gifts is also important because if the devotee wants to show us some kind of love, this is important that we allow such an exchange, and of course we must always be giving. And then we must give prasad and accept prasad. So those are the broad outlines that Srila Rupa Goswami gives us. So that means that if we have these opportunities to serve devotees in this way, we can invite them to, wherever appropriate, we can invite them to our homes and give them prasadam. And then we can accept their invitations and accept prasadam. We can always, of course, give gifts, spiritual gifts, of course, as much as possible. But if there's something material that a devotee may need, sometimes devotees want to travel to the Dham, they need some Lakshmi, we can also help them with such things. That's also spiritual, though it seems material. And then we can also, with in these days, especially when everyone is going through so many difficulties with the mind, so much anxiety and depression, we can always be that considerate ear to hear them out when devotees want advice or they need someone to talk to. We can be there to do that for them, to offer them that service. And we can also, from the pure devotee, we can inquire, of course, but we always say not absurd questions, but we can always inquire confidentially from the senior devotees, pure devotees, Uttamadikaris, and get their advice. And in that way, we can make advancements which will please them as well. And of course, pure devotees, as much as possible, we must serve in every way. Wherever they need assistance, you should render it to them. Sometimes, they may need transportation, they need facilities for preaching and stuff like that. That's very important, especially preaching services that are so dear to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we can get the hints by actually associating with devotees nicely. We may not know how to come out and ask them what they may need, and devotees are generally very humble and they won't come out and tell you if they need something. But just by talking to them and genuinely, considerately finding out how they are, how their lives are going. We can see if there's some way or the other we can assist them. Something may be going on in their lives in a particular way, even if they may not directly come out and ask, we can always offer that assistance. So that's like a broad outline of how we serve devotees. Is that
Thank you,
okay?
Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj. Yes, thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions? If there are none, we're going to recite some prayers since Friday is Balaram Purni. It's a very, very important festival in our Vaishnava calendar. This is the appearance day of Lord Balaram. He is the first expansion of Krishna, and he is also in the role of Lord Krishna's brother. He appears as the younger brother, Lakshman in Ramlila, and he appears as the older brother, Lord Balaram, Krishna Lila, and Nityananda Gaura. And the wonderful thing about Lord Balaram's appearance as the older brother is that he's not taking on this position to tell Krishna what to do, as is common when you want to be in a senior position. He wants the ability to serve Krishna more, protect him more, because Lord Balaram just personifies service to Krishna. He actually expands as everything that is used to serve Krishna, including all the articles that we use for worship. This is his entire existence, it's just service to Krishna. So he's like Srimati Radharani, how deep the devotion and service to get his mercy so much in order to get Krishna's mercy. And of course, we know that the spiritual master is the external representation of Lord Balaram, is the first spiritual master. So these are some nice prayers, which have a wonderful benefit recited at the end, that we will get free of Maya, which is very important point after today's task. So these prayers are actually authored by Srila Vyasadeva and found in Gaura. गोलोकधामाधिपतिः पारेश्वर पारेषु मां पातु पवित्रकीर्तनाः भूमण्डलं सर्षपावद्भिर्वक्ष्यते यान्मूर्तिमां पातु सा भूमिमण्डले सेनासु मां रक्षतु सीरपाणि युद्धे सदा रक्षतु मां च दुर्गेषु चाव्यासालीसादमां यानेषु सङ्कर्षण आदिदेवः कालिन्दजावेगहरोचलेषु नीलम्बरो रक्षतु मां सदा भूम् वायो च रामो वधूके बालश महार्णवेनन्त्रवपुः सदा माम् श्रीवासुदेवो वतु पर्वतेषु सहस्रशीर्षा च महाविवादे रोगेषु मां रक्षतु रोहिण्यो मां कामपालो वतु अवाविपत्सु कामात् सदा रक्षतु हिनुकारिकी क्रोधात् सदा मां विविधप्रहारी लोभात् सदा रक्षतु बाबलारि मोहात् सदा मां पिता मागधारि प्रातः सदा रक्षतु वृष्णिदुर्गः प्रहने सदा मां मधुरपुरेन्द्रः मध्याह्नदिने गोपसखः प्रपातु स्वरात् प्रहने वतु मां सदैव सायं फणीन्द्रो वतु मां सदैव परात् परो रक्षतु मां प्रदोषे पूर्णे निशीते च दुरन्तवीर्यः प्रत्यूषकाले वतु मां सदैव विदिक्षु मां रक्षतु प्रवाहिपत्ये दिक्षु प्रलम्बारिर्आधो यदुद्भः Vahaha Urdhvam Sada Mam Balabhadra Arad Tata Samantad Baladeva Evahi Antaha Sadavyat Purushottamo Bahir Nagendra Vilo Vatuma Mahabalaha Sadantaratma Chavasan Hariti Swayam Kapalta Purnaha Parameshvaro Mahan Devasuranam Bhayanashanam Cha Bhutashanam Papa Chaye Dhananana Vinashanam Vigna Gatasya Vidhi Siddhasanam Karma Parampadasya. The translation: May Lord Balaram, who is the master of Goloka, who is the supreme controller of all controllers, and whose fame is spotless, protect me. May Lord Balaram, who on his head holds the earth as if it were a single mustard seed, protect me in this world. May Lord Balaram protect me when I am surrounded by many armies. May Lord Balaram, who holds a plough, always protect me in battle. May Lord Balaram, who holds a club, always protect me in fortresses. May Lord Balaram, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, protect me in the forest. May Lord Balaram, who wears blue garments, who stops the Yamuna, always protect me in fire. May Lord Balaram protect me in the May Lord Balaram protect me in the sky. May Lord Balaram, who is Ananta, Lord Ananta himself, always protect me in the great ocean. May Lord Balaram, who is Vasudev's son, protect me on mountains. May Lord Balaram, who has 1,000 heads, protect me in great disputes. May Lord Balaram, who is Rohini's son, protect me from disease. May Lord Balaram, who fulfills desires, protect me from catastrophe. May Lord Balaram, who is the enemy of the Nukasura, always protect me from lust. May Lord Balaram, who killed Duvida, always protect me from anger. May Lord Balaram, who is the enemy of Valvala, always protect me from greed. May Lord Balaram, who is the enemy of Jarasandha, always protect me from illusion. May Lord Balaram, who is the best of the Vishnus, always protect me at sunrise. May Lord Balaram, who is the king of Mathura city, always protect me in the morning. May Lord Balaram, who is a friend of the Gopas, always protect me at midday. May Lord Balaram, who is supremely independent, always protect me in the afternoon. May Lord Balaram, who is the king of serpents, always protect me at sunset. May Lord Balaram, who is greater than the greatest, always protect me. May Lord Balaram, whose power is invincible, always protect me in the middle of the night. May Lord Balaram always protect me every sunrise. May Lord Balaram, who is the master of Ravati, protect me from every direction. May Lord Balaram, who is the enemy of Pralamba, protect me from every direction. May Lord Balaram, who is the best of the Yadavas, protect me from below. May Lord Balaram always protect me from above. May Lord Balaram protect me from near and far. May Lord Balaram protect me everywhere. May Lord Balaram, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, always protect me from within. May powerful Lord Balaram, who enjoys pastimes as the King of Serpents, protect me from without. May Lord Balaram, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Super Soul residing in everyone's heart, always protect me. Please know that this kavacha of Lord Balaram is the best of arms. It destroys the fears of the demigods and demons. It is a blazing fire that burns up the fuel of a host of sins. It is the death of a host of obstacles. It is the abode of spiritual perfection. So this extra information is that Gargamuni previously gave this mantra to the Brajagopis. Herein, this Rajvipaka Muni speaks the same kavacha to Duryodhan. After bathing and dressing in clean cotton garments, a person should sit on the tusha grass mat, purify his hands with mantras, bow down, fix intelligence, meditate on Lord Krishna's elder brother, Lord Balaram, while chanting this mantra. This kavacha will ensure one full protection against Maya, as stated in Bhagavad Gita. Shri Krishna Balaram ki jai. So once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You all have a nice Lord Balaram always. Please join us next week when we discuss the fifth chapter. Jai Gaura Hari ki jai, Shri Prabhupada jai, Hare Krishna.
Thank you,
Hare
Maharaj ji.
Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
thank you.
Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, dear Mataji.
Thank you.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.